You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Well, hello and welcome to the 602 Club, coming at you from the desolate planet of Exegol. And I gotta say, this place could use a facelift, and I'm really excited to be here today as we are going to be diving into a pretty substantial Star Wars book in Shadow of the Sith. And I'm just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and I'm really excited to welcome back with me is just, Star Wars literary expert extraordinaire from Beyond the Films, Star Wars Beyond the Films there over on the Star Wars Report Network, the one and only Mark Hurliman.
Hey, it's good to be here. I had to loop around twice to find the place.
I know, it's so difficult to find, and it's like, come on, just make more than two wayfinders. That would be great, guys. Right? Come on.
I got to admit, that's probably one aspect of the story that I really enjoyed, because when I watched that scene in The Rise of Skywalker, I'm like, why didn't you just fly around the cloud?
Yeah. The fact that the cloud encompasses the planet, that was, because the way they, visually, anyway. But we're going to get to all of the stuff here as much as possible. I mean, this book is massive, and actually one of the biggest Star Wars books that has been released, except for, I say, Lesser Evil, which was massive, which... Thank God it was. But anyway, before we get into all of that, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we'd love it if you do a few things. Whatever pod-catching device that you were listening on, just hit subscribe so you'll get the shows as soon as they drop. Of course, you can also follow us all over the place on social media. We've got Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. You can find us on Facebook with the entire network, facebook.com/TrekFM, and of course we've got the website trek.fm where you can find all of the shows that we are doing, as well as, if you like the show, best way to help us continue to grow, just share us with your friends. Word of mouth is great, especially even on social media too, and you can give us star ratings and reviews on places like Apple Podcasts or Spotify and those kind of things, and it helps more people find the show. So Mark, I figured, this is such a massive book, so I figured what we would kind of do is break it down into our major characters, and then just basically their storylines, and then kind of go into some of the other connections that get made throughout the book. And thankfully, as we're talking about some of these characters, in all honesty, we're going to be talking about a lot of the connections that get made, because this book... Just before we even get to the characters, this book is one that is truly trying to find a way to bring the disparate elements of the sequel trilogy together from all three films, as well as all of the things that have been kind of slowly trickling out throughout the literature, whether it's comics or books or any of those type of things. And this is trying to find a way to make all of that make more sense, which, in all honesty, disappointing that has to be the case, but thankful that they're actually trying to do that at this point.
That's always been kind of a catch-22 with storytelling and having the films and stuff coming out. What can you pitch later that's going to, bolster it up? Like me and Nathan on Beyond the Films have always said, the Stover effect with the Revenge of the Sith, the way that just added depth to it, that when you rewatch the film, you really get a kick out of it. I think to a degree, when it comes to like Rey's story, I get a little bit of that from this, because, you get to the setup for her, but I feel like the time placement of this, where it's 10 years before and after the last couple movies we saw, it feels a little weird, because like when we end off for some characters, like they're sitting in certain spots for 10 whole years, it feels like. I mean, granted, they may go off and do other stuff, but I mean, for all we know right now, they're just sitting there for 10 years. And it feels like what a way to just kind of toss that character off to the side and be like, well, that's where he's at now. But yeah, I mean, we've always kind of had that to a degree of where we've had to go back in other mediums and had the opportunity to either retcon or flush out what they originally meant with certain things. And this one had some cool stuff, man, like especially in the aspect of what it brings with the Sith. You know, I mean, you have, that's always been like a crux when it comes to certain friends of mine where they hated Legends because, well, you know, Vader destroys Palpatine. He was the chosen one. He destroyed the Sith. If anybody Sith-wise shows up, well, then his sacrifice meant nothing. And they hated Legends because, you know, Palpatine came back and stuff. And now I'm like, in an era where canon brought Palpatine back, and we're kind of seeing that to a whole new degree. And I'm just like, those friends are just still beside themselves with grief. But I'm like sitting here enjoying what we're getting, yet we're still having so many questions unanswered.
Yeah.
Like the whole Sith Eternal and what it means to be an assassin of the Sith. And, you know, in the rule of two, where in the heck did all these Sith come from?
Yep.
And are they Sith? I mean, can we really call them Sith? And if we are, doesn't that mean we should still be calling Ahsoka a Jedi? Because I really don't feel like any of them are any more Sith than, you know, Rogana Ismarin was.
I think that, I think that's a great way to kind of start, because obviously this book is called Shadow of the Sith. And one of the big things that this book specifically is trying to do is trying to work in all of the things that we kind of, I don't mean this in a mean way, but you just kind of got dumped on us in the final film, where there's this Exegol planet, there's this basically the planet of the Sith, and that it's been hidden all this time, and there are all these cultists on it, and like it just opened Pandora's box really in so many ways, where there's so many questions. And like you said, how does this all work with the rule of two and the history that's kind of been alluded to? The Clone Wars has kind of alluded to, like a Darth Bane, and, you know, like these other Sith that we knew from, you know, expansion and Legends and everything, right? And they've kind of slowly been kind of working back in the history. And it does almost feel like, you know, this book kind of starts the process of expanding on Exegol and where all these people come from and what this place actually is. But I do feel like, you know, somewhere along the way, something in Star Wars, if you ever really truly, I think, want the sequel trilogy to make sense and feel completely more cohesive with the other films and everything else we've gotten, you do need to explain this place specifically and the Sith Eternal and all of this stuff and work it back into everything else. Maybe that's what Acolyte would do. I don't know. But, like, you know, I think you're 100% right in the sense that, like, yeah, we have all this stuff, and it's like, it's great that we get some answers in this book, which we totally do. But there are still, like, just planet-sized questions that we have.
Well, and it goes back to The Force Awakens. I mean, you know, we see the First Order, and, you know, we wonder that, and then we get Aftermath, which expresses that, you know, the cream of the crop, the First Order of the Empire, is going to go outside the galaxy, regroup, rebuild, and come back, which we then see happen with Snoke, you know, in the lead. We never really find out where Snoke came from in the aspect of how they found him, how he rose to power in their group. We do know that he is a puppet of Palpatine's later, but that doesn't answer any of that at all.
Right.
And that, I think, is one of the bigger things that I started with trying to figure out, but I've eventually had to just toss that out because it's like Snoke really didn't matter. And so it's like, well, the building of power, I keep coming back to that. It's like, what was Palpatine's plan? Like, why are you fracturing what you have and then rebuilding 4 different ways from Sunday. That seems really odd to me, to have the First Order over here and then to have the Sith Eternal over here, and then to find out that he already had this fleet during all this time. I'm like, wow, that's insane. Like that.
Yeah.
Why didn't you use that a long time ago, bro?
That is one thing that's really interesting, is that, we do get some behind the scenes with Exegol and all of those type of questions, and the fact that, the Sith Eternal have been spending all this time, creating this fleet, which is something that is taking them obviously a ton of time, right? To build this many ships. One of the things this book I think does really well in that sense too is that it lowers the number of ships that they've created from the film, where it's like they've got hundreds of thousands of ships, which is just insane. It's not even possible. There's just no way. The building materials alone for that it's not even possible on Exegol, as a planet. And so I think that was nice. But I think, again, you just are raising so many great questions, is that how does all of this really, work together? And there's a lot of details to which we still don't have, even with this book, which, again, this is not a fault of this book at all. Right. So I don't want to hear anybody, as we're talking about this, and they just want to turn this off, like, oh, they're just going to be trashing this book. No, I don't think there's anything that I would trash in this book. What we're talking about, I think, is, as we're beginning our conversation, there are still just so many questions that we do have as fans, because they haven't legitimately been answered yet. And that we're always there. I think you brought up really correctly, even from the time The Force Awakens came out, and I've been hitting this drum ever since that movie came out. There was no backstory. There was no understanding of the history of the galaxy 30 years later. We still don't really get most of that. We still don't really understand most of that. And, obviously The Mandalorian is starting to build that time period, right? But as to, what our major characters are going through, how the New Republic is set up, all of that type of stuff, there's a lot of questions in that. And so one thing I want to, let's jump to Luke Skywalker, because, he's obviously one of the main characters in this book, along with Lando Calrissian, and probably, I would say, the biggest draw to this book of people wanting to see, okay, what's Luke up to? And one of the big things that we do get is that we tie together this idea that we tie together Battlefront 2, we tie together things that we've seen in the comics, we tie together him creating his own temple, which, we knew happened, but we also saw the beginning of that in The Mandalorian, and the role of Luke as the Jedi Master, creating his temple, as well as the role of Luke continually searching and looking for artifacts and understanding of the Force to deepen his understanding of the Force, and so that really seems like his goal is to do this job that he's been given the best of his ability, and that brings in people like Lor Santeca and things like that. So I was just really excited to be getting this book and really see that Luke Skywalker that we all fell in love with from Return of the Jedi, and then we all fell in love with in Battlefront 2, continue here in Shadow of the Sith.
It had that early Legends Luke feel, like right there with Courtship of Princess Leia, and I really enjoyed the scenes when they were doing the excavation. Like it felt like it was very Indiana Jones meets the Sith, I thought that was a really cool aspect, and the way the things tied together and the way the story moved along like that, and Luke being central to that. And I think that, like you said, there's so much here. It's like sitting down at Thanksgiving dinner, and it's like, what do you want to, start with? Because there was just so much going on in this book. Like you said, it's a massive book, and Luke is definitely the draw. And I think, when I got to the end of it, I wanted more of Rey's family, But when I look back on it, yeah, Luke was, their story was second. Whereas when I thought it was going to be more, they were going to be the center of the story. But yeah, I definitely feel like I'm digesting it all still. Like I literally just finished reading it before we started, this episode. And I'm still like trying to put together things that as it was played out in the book, like, okay, that worked there, this worked there. But like, think about Palpatine, right? This book's 10 years and yet Palpatine's already returned. Like it was slowly dropped out there. And Luke's been having these, sensations and stuff. And at the beginning, it's all kind of mystery. We don't really know. It's like we're presented these problems and we see some stuff and we can assume some things. But by the book's end, like Luke comes to the conclusion it was a different character that was causing him to feel that, which it might have been. But I kind of feel like, Palpatine probably is the more realistic cause of everything that's going on with Luke and what little influence the dark side's putting in on him right now. But as the book progresses, you watch him be the Luke that we love. And yet at the end of this, I was struck by the aspect that he still fails. And I feel like in a lot of ways, it is kind of getting, if you haven't watched the movies, it's getting you ready for some of what's going to come. We see Luke kind of conflicted and feeling a little more cut off from the Force through events that have happened in the story, but he doesn't start out that way. He starts out way more secure in his abilities with the Force and less secure in how am I going to, raise the next generation, which is always a classic Luke in general, whether it be Legends or the new canon.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think it's interesting because you do raise an interesting conundrum with this book that, there is a victory for Luke in the sense that he is able to defeat the shadow of the Sith here, and yet there is never a place where he's able to make the connection with, Rey and her parents, which is the side story that they're always running parallel with him and Lando, but they never are able to actually make the connection there. And so it does make a little bit more sense, too, that you get this idea that, Luke would have some inkling of Rey, basically when she comes to him because of the adventure that him and Lando have been on here. But there's a real interesting aspect of this character here where I mean, again, I just, like you mentioned, the work that he is doing in almost Indiana Jones style with Lor Santeca and looking for these artifacts and the relics of the Jedi and the Sith that are helping him understand the Force, which I find really fascinating. And also connects with something that we've been seeing, in all of the new canon literature, artifacts being very important. And so I think that was great. And, Luke in and of himself in this book, I think, is just really well written because, like you said, he feels very much like the Luke that we are familiar with from the original series, and I think anybody who's familiar with Legends would recognize this Luke Skywalker. And so I wanted to ask you a really big question that comes from this book, because there is a character that is actually the Shadow of the Sith in Kiza, who was a member of the Acolytes of the Beyond, who was given a mask, much like the Monman mask, but a Viceroy Exim Penshard by Yupe Tashu. That's right. We're digging all the way back into the very first, Aftermath series. And
I actually, for a moment, wanted to go and grab the book and see what in the little side chapters was referenced.
Yes, exactly. And then she also has the lightsaber of Darth Noctis, which we had in the Sith Legends book. This Luke Skywalker is the same Luke Skywalker that we saw in Return of the Jedi, who is willing to do whatever it took to try and bring somebody back towards the light, the same way he did with his father. And he almost dies in trying to bring Kiza back to the light. And she, she does not, spoiler alert, obviously we're going to spoil this entire book because that's why we're here, just to talk about it. But I loved that because it's the character that I know who is willing to do whatever it takes. And so when we talked earlier about there being this kind of still so much to explain, there's still a lot of Luke Skywalker. I think this book is 17 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. So we still have about, 13 years left before we get to the events of or maybe a little bit more than that because it's 30. So we've still got some time, right? Before we get to The Force Awakens. And it's like, this Luke feels so consistent with what we know, and yet feels inconsistent then with the Luke we see later. And so I love that, though, in the sense that this is the Luke Skywalker that I love.
Right. And it's almost like when you watch Frodo leave Shire, it's like that moment for Luke. It's like we're watching the Luke we know leave. We've got the setup that he's going to go on an adventure and he's going to end up the Luke that we see later. And we get the touchstones as to what could possibly be the main reasons. And I hope we get more to flesh out what kind of pushes Luke, because that is a fundamental change in Luke. And you're right. With Kiza, there was a character that I really enjoyed that aspect. And yet at the same time, it was kind of detached. Like I was trying to figure out where these characters, I wasn't sure if they were from Heir to the Jedi. I'm like, man, where did he run into Comat and all this? And the Acolytes of Beyond. I'm like, was that from Aftermath? Like, I couldn't quite place that. And I never really stopped to look it up because I was plowing through this book. Like that was the thing about it, was like, it was adding new details each time. But with Penchard, like, I wish that character would have explained more about why he wanted to get to Exegol, why he didn't know about Exegol or how to get there. Yeah. I mean, because he was a Sith. And so that kind of connection as to what the importance of Exegol is. I mean, we've had so many planets and worlds that were the birthplace of the Sith or the homeworld of the Sith. And then you find out, it was just one of many. And then Exegol shows up, and Exegol definitely seems to be, promises of big things, because that was the main thing, was like, if I get there, I'll be reborn. But we don't know how. Like, I'm sitting there going, why? Because about cloning stuff, and we know they're just cloning things there. Like, that it didn't explain much to me. And the fact that Palpatine, was already alive and is talking to Ochi, and I'm like, that part felt a lot like what we got in Rise of Skywalker. It's like, oh yeah, he's back. Like, come on, man, give me a little more on that. Like, I'm dying to know these type of details.
Well, and I do think that you raising that is something that's really important, because these connections, we have Kiza, and then Comat, who is the woman who, in the Aftermath series, that, Luke helped free from the Acolytes of the Beyond, and then ends up helping Luke and Lando in their search. And I think that was one of the weaknesses of the Aftermath series, is that you had too many stories that didn't really seem to connect well in the overall flow. And that really kind of hurt the connections. It's like those books should have been books just all on their own, instead of kind of like loosely, loosely connected vignettes, and so, I was right there with you in the sense that, when these things were happening with Luke and these characters were coming in that he had this connection with, like, I had to look stuff up because I couldn't remember, 10 years ago, the book that had come out, or almost 10 years ago now, the book that had come out to help explain these things. And so, and I think one of the things that by you saying that is that, yes, there is this fundamental change that's going to be happening with Luke. And the same way, and I like to bringing up the idea with Frodo, because Frodo is fundamentally different as a character, like, by the time he gets back to the Shire. In fact, he's never the same. Right. What in the world would happen to Luke to have that happen? Like, I don't even know how you create I don't even know how you create a Mordor experience for Luke that would fundamentally change him in that way.
Well, I think that they're going to have to play up that loss of connection that he's feeling there at the end, because there are times throughout the story where Luke's like, I know this is okay. Like when he knows that Rey is going to be safe and that Ochi will never find her. And yet Lando's like, don't tell me that, Luke, don't even do it. And yet Luke knows in his heart that that's literally the case. But I'm kind of thinking like maybe down the road, as that closed offness, they don't really explain too much. It's like he's like separated but not separated, and so as that kind of builds up, I'd like to see him lose that kind of certainty, and then start to question his connection with the Force, and then his ability to judge things, and then have that lead towards that down the road. But you'd have to do that in a series of books. You couldn't do it just all in one.
Well, and
because that's so key to who Luke was.
It's a great point. No, you're 100% right. And I think that's kind of the thing that I feel as though the problem is that we've kind of seen that story though before with the Clone Wars, right? Where the Jedi don't really realize they're losing their connection with the Force in the way that and it is happening. And so it just feels like a road that's already been traveled. So, how they do that and when they do it, I don't know. But I think what's fascinating is...
Well, maybe that rhythm, though, is supposed to be, because in a sense, this is all Palpatine doing.
Right, right. And
he did that with the Jedi the first time. And some people have made the argument that we only see Palpatine show up after he knows Luke is dead.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, I mean, maybe that's, the realization that, Luke is the Jedi and the Jedi have always been a thorn. And the way it worked the last time was I had to fog their vision. It was the only way to come at them. But that's not really presented in the book that way. That's me kind of stretching for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I think one of the things that we're just, we obviously, both you and I we're such big fans. And so a book like this, which answers some questions, just ends up continuing to raise so many more questions. And part of that is just, there is this, I would say, this just kind of disconnect with the way in which the sequel trilogy itself connects with the rest of Star Wars, because there are all of these questions. And so, I'm just glad that we got Luke and we got him here in this story in the way that we did, and it was a real joy to be able to read him in this way. I think, most of us were wanting this type of story with him, and I'm so glad that we got it. And, regardless of all the questions that we kind of raised, like this story alone, I really just enjoyed being with him and reading him, and what he's willing to do to not only try to find answers, but also to, redeem characters that are almost, in some ways, one of them is unredeemable. It, continues to choose only power. And so...
Well, I enjoyed this Lando Luke buddy cop version much better than the Legends version. I mean, we still got the chocolate milk reference. There were references up the wazoo, man. The Errant Venture was referenced. I was all excited about that. Plagueis, Revan was mentioned again. We had Noctis, Sangis, Kekon, Vord, there were so many names thrown out at one point where I'm like, oh, this is cool. I really get a kick out of those kind of connections and stuff. But I really got depth out of Lando this time around. The father aspect and the fact that, you could tell that so much of his life had fallen apart. He'd lost his daughter. He wasn't with his wife. I don't even think they named his wife in this book. Like, I was just like, man, and I almost wonder if that's not just, the author didn't know and the author didn't want to commit, but more of that's a sign of Lando's relationship that, you lost the kid and she's done with you kind of thing. Like, there was a lot of emotions for me when it came to Lando's need to save Rey. and the way that tied in, and the way that they, it wasn't a lot, it wasn't heavy handed, but you definitely had the sense that losing Kadara was major for him. And to the point that, like I'd said earlier, he's the character that sits at this planet. I mean, he does mention it. He's going to use it as a base to continue searching a section of space he hadn't. But for all intents and purposes, Lando's sitting on Pasan for 10 years before we see him again. It's like, whoa, dude.
Yeah. No, I think there were, there were a lot of questions that came up with the Lando story. Part of that had to do with exactly what you said, which is what in the world happened with his marriage. We still actually didn't get the answer completely as like what happened with his daughter and why she was taken. And I kind of had hoped that we were going to get some more connections with that story in the sense of like I wanted to know more of the details of that. And maybe that's something they're planning on doing later. But, it was really, I thought this is one of the best Landos that we've gotten in the new canon, because Adam Christopher really seemed to take the character seriously. That Lando is not just this playboy. That Lando has emotions and desires, and that he had that go beyond gambling and getting laid, which I really appreciate, because the character is so much more than that. And I think that's one of the things that storyline does actually add to him, is it gives him more weight. And
did you just read the book, or did you also listen to the audiobook?
I have not read. I have not gotten a chance to listen to the audiobook at all.
See, I got it, and so I was doing both at the end, and whoever was doing the audiobook nailed Lando.
Nice.
And so what I really wanted to know from you is when you were reading it, did you get the same feeling of you were listening to Billy D. Williams talking? Like, because the guy that did the narration nailed it, sounded like him and everything.
That's fantastic.
But the way it was wrote kind of had that Lando Calrissian feel, with just the way that the dialogue was presented.
No, I agree with you. I felt like I could hear the voices of the characters, Luke and Lando specifically, which was great. It's what you always want from one of these books, that you would capture the voice of the characters, which is fantastic. So no, I think he really did. And Lando, I think, is a difficult one to capture, because I think people always go over the top with Lando, and that's what I appreciate about here, is that we don't go over the top with Lando, because that's not what it's about. I think everybody just, again, kind of wants to make him this sex-crazed playboy, and that's not all he is. There's so much more to Lando as a character, especially by this point in time, and I think he really nailed it. The author gets that, and I think that's what made the story so heartbreaking for the character of Lando. And one of the things that we do is that they bring in a ton of references to the first Lando comic that we got, which is actually pretty fantastic. The fact that Lando had been on that Sith ship, and seeing all of these different types of relics. He knew what Lor San Tekka and Luke were talking about when we're talking about these type of things. And so I thought that was a really great callback, because in many ways that comic has really not been used often as a reference point. And we finally got that as a reference point, and it fit very organically then in the story that we're telling here.
Yeah, and ironically, Animaxer or whatever his name was, he was presented very much like the Lando Calrissian that we all, the sleazier side, like the way he would talk. Yeah. There were times where I almost thought it was Lando talking, and then I was like, oh wait, no. Because the way that the guy was doing it would just be a little more sleazy. But you got that feeling like Lando's more of a jack of all trades in this. I mean, there's internal Lando narration that's going on that you could just tell when it's a Lando centric chapter, because like he just like embellishes a little bit more. And like they even have the Calrissian Chronicles was great that came back up into play. And the running gag of, I was a general, and his connection with Shiv and everybody else, or Shriv, from
that was great.
The games. I thought that was cool. Yeah. There was a lot of connections like that.
That was fantastic. Again, just more connections that we see really utilized. And again, I said in my review, this book is working overtime to bring things together from all of canon, and especially what we've been getting in new canon, so things start to connect and make more sense. And so I really, really appreciated that in this book. And I thought it was, especially with Lando, that's something that's just really important because he has been a part of a lot of this story. And I think the one, downside to it is that because of where the story takes place, you kind of mentioned the idea of that Luke fails, but we don't really get the opportunity to have either of these characters be successful in their missions. And that's kind of frustrating, I think, as you're just reading the story, because you do know where everybody's going to end up, and that, there's not going to be a connection between Lando and Rey's parents, or Luke and Rey's parents. He's not going to find his daughter or really get a clue as to where she is, and so there's a lot of those things which are kind of like just a little bit sad that we're not going to get movement on those stories, which is a place where it's like, I would like to see some movement, I think all of us as fans would like to have an understanding of what happened. Does he ever find his daughter? Is Jonna, his daughter, or is it just a coincidence? Those are all just things that are just left out there that, in all honesty, feel like they're rife for a book to tell us. So, I think
that book could actually explain why Luke wouldn't put Rey together too. Right now you're like, well, hey, you were on a mission, you had a little girl, and hey, here's this little girl. But if you think about Lando being one of many kids that this mysterious First Order, this evil entity was taking, then that adventure in this story just becomes one of many kids in this time frame that just disappeared. Luke wouldn't make that connection, which would make sense.
Well, and gosh, you just raised a quick question, and not something to like get full discussion into, but it's like, okay, how does the First Order fit into all of this with Palpatine's plans and everything? Like, that doesn't make, it seems to make very little sense as to how all that works when, he's got the whole planet of Sith that are, so that's a whole other discussion. But I guess one of the things I'm really interested in too for you is, we finally, Ochi of Bassoon has been a character that we've been seeing a ton of in the comics, especially the Darth Vader run, and what they're doing with the Crimson War that's going on, and everything. Here, we get an understanding of exactly what's driving him to want to get to Exegol, and what's driving him to take the mission from the Sith Eternal to look for Rey in the first place, and how all of that connects so that Rey ends up on Jakku in the first place.
And that was so weird too, because like they started at Jakku and then they go back to Jakku. Let's everybody go back to Jakku.
That's a good question.
I did wish though that Exegol was explained more. I mean, that to me, like, they gave us why Ochi wanted to go, but I really felt like there needed to be more prominence to the planet and why, we know about the ships, and outside of that, I feel like there's a Force side threat that was just never really presented in a way that it should have been. Especially when you think about, Exum's character wanting to get back to be reborn. So, you know, there's something at play here. We know Palpatine was reborn there. There's a lot of those type of details that I still want to know more about.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because I think one of the things that happens there in the story with Ochi, you know, his desire to go back to Exegol is he believes that it's this place where he can be fully reborn, that he will get, you know, basically his full body back. So,
right,
you know, he won't have these cybernetic enhancements with the eyes and, you know, the Lobo-like thing around the back of his head, you know, that he can be fully remade. And which is obviously something that does kind of connect to what Palpatine and the Sith Eternal have been trying to do for Palpatine for the most part this whole time. But where did this idea come from? And I think you're absolutely right. Like, again, it just raises more questions about Exegol and what it is and how it all works, and with the Sith and everything else. How does this all fit together? And
right, because I see more of a science connection than a Force one. You know, I mean, it's like clearly everybody wants to go back to this place to be reborn in a clone body. And it was around page 175 where Animaxer is talking to, and he's scanning Dathan and the family. And that's when he notices, and he mentions the Maker's Mark. And they throw out the Calm logo protein and stuff. And I'm like, oh, Calm, like that's Dorsk 81 from Legends, like little tiny things like that. Like, I definitely got to feel that Adam was doing a Luciano where he was just tossing in all these little stuff. I mean, so much stuff that I was like, I stopped trying to find out what it was being referenced to, because I was like, this is just slowing me down.
No,
but I was just flying.
I'm right there with you. I mean, there's just so much stuff. And again, I think, you know, a book like this, it answers some questions, but it also illuminates just how many questions still remain.
Like the scene when Luke goes to Tython and he has the vision where he's transported to Exegol. I thought that was awesome. But when all these like Sith race show up and they've got these black lightsabers and they're trying to attack him, I'm sitting here going like, you know, where do these guys fit into the Sith hierarchy? Are they like Inquisitors? Are these guys just ghosts in the Force? Do they not actually exist? Are these real blades? Like, there was so much going on that I wanted to know more about. But, you know, like you said, maybe we'll get that later. Maybe there'll be more tie-in stuff with Tython and Exegol and you know, stuff in the past. I know with the High Republic, we're going farther in the past for similar type of reasons to kind of blow things up in that regard. But there was so much going on when it came to the side of the Force, like even the dagger wanting to, you know, pull the blood in, and the saber of Noctis's, the way it would take and kill the souls would be pulled into that mask. Like, I thought that was a cool way that they were going about it, and everyone was added to the mask. And the way that played out for Keese's character was really sad. Like, when Luke realized she was gone. But there were also the aspect of that character, the Sith himself, like Luke's dismissing the character. You know, it's the Force, it's the dark side, and he's the relic of an ancient power. But I'm starting to believe that less and less. Like, I'm truly feeling like these Sith are possessing these things with their spirits completely, because I mean, he takes over her dead body at the end, has these droids replace her arm and stuff. Like, that was a sinister moment. And I'm like, so, I mean, you know, Luke failed, but I guess Luke also did win, because he did stop this one Sith from rising up. But man, when that moment happened, I'm like, holy crap, what's going on? And the way that the Kyber crystal played into tying the element of the digging down the Indiana Jones aspect, Exegol itself, because the main crystal originated from Exegol. So they were trying to take those shards and find their way. They're basically going to use the Kyber crystal as a wayfinder. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. And for the first time, Exegol felt more like the Maw installation at the center of, you know, the black holes that you could only get to a certain way. So I appreciated that a lot more than I did when I saw it, you know, in the films, because it was just like a red cloud. And I'm like, why didn't you just fly around that cloud? That makes no sense. But that at least was presented in a way and explained in a way that it made a lot more sense.
I mean, it felt more like Kessel in some ways, like that there's only one way in or out, and it's so complex. It's not even like Kessel where you can make it through. So yeah, no, I think that's, again, so many questions.
What I haven't heard is anybody complaining about the Maillet thing, because that felt like, we just did this. Right. And it's a cool, it's a character that went into a mass. And that's the same thing with Maillet. If any of the listeners haven't read the Darth Vader comics, when he's building his castle on Mustafar, he's using it to try to get and break the barrier between deaths so he can get to Padme. And Maillet has all these abilities and was able to have done it. And so he's using the mask and possessing different stormtroopers and officers and stuff and building it and building it, building it. And Maillet's trying to get back to life, basically. And that's 100% the same thing that's going on with Pasham's character or Pashard's character.
Which is...
Did you feel like that was reused too soon or okay?
I think with that whole section, I mean, I liked that it obviously connected to something that we had seen before. But I think, the Monument thing, it was... I think it's neat. But I also do worry about just all of these ideas is that we're creating the ability for Sith to live forever. And, what I do appreciate is that basically this all still connects to the idea that Sith only want to live physically forever. They don't care about living spiritually forever or being one with the Force. It is so. I think,
all about the
exactly.
power.
So I think that connects well enough and it works. I do think you have to be very careful to not overuse the idea. Otherwise, it just feels like too much. And so.
There definitely feels like there's an aspect of an essence transfer that needs to be involved, and that being like a protected secret. Because I would, if I was a Sith Lord and I knew that trick, I sure wouldn't be telling anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. So yeah, there's a lot here, and there's a lot of interesting ideas. And I think that's one of the things that, again, that's part of what happened, I think, just in general with the sequel trilogy, is that there are some really interesting ideas and making sure everything feels connected and natural into the ideas of everything else that is coming throughout Star Wars is really important. And so, but there's still, keep saying it, there's just still so many questions. And part of that, we got Rey and her parents' story. So we definitely got Dathan's story about, how he's this clone of Palpatine. He's the Strand cast clone, so connects with, other things that we've seen in Star Wars and those ideas, but he has no Force abilities, and he finds a way off of Exegol and is able to, find somebody to end up married with, and she knows who he is. She knows that they need to be on the run, and, obviously they're trying to protect Rey, and it's very, original series Star Wars. We're going to hide Luke on the last place you think of people would look, which is the planet that, why would anybody be here, again, and so, I thought all of that worked relatively well. I thought, the hard thing for Christopher in this book is that he is tied to the quick scenes that you see in The Rise of Skywalker, which it's not always the most organic, I think, actually storytelling-wise, for him to have them steal Ochi's ship so that, a lot of that stuff, it's like, oh, I don't know if that's, all, but
yeah, that was
he works,
that was the thing that done them in, though.
but he works overtime to make all of that work. And so, again, it was just finally nice to get some of those answers.
Right. I really appreciated getting to see the scene between father and son when Anakin's Force Ghost came to Luke. That was, I'm honestly surprised that no one hasn't done that sooner.
Yeah.
Like, and kind of like what happened with Heir to the Empire with Ben Kenobi's ghost, though, we kind of see him possibly not coming back. Like, it looked like there was some interference there for Anakin at the end. I don't know if that's something that's going to be a permanent thing or if we'll ever even see him come back. But I thought that was kind of a cool little touch. It was cool to see the corporate sector authority, and that section of space being mentioned and talked about. That was always something. I always loved those Han Solo books and stuff. So, like, just that little touch
and Rick
there.
Pride being there.
I felt
so.
Yes.
Which
dude,
kind of a random reference,
I'm glad you brought him up.
That you're like, okay, I'm not sure exactly how this will connect, like from him being somebody who served Palpatine, but anyway, all right.
Right. Well, and then it was like he had like 2 chapters, and in the second one, he's like, eventually I'm gonna lead everything, and they're like, oh, that's slick. Okay, cool. Yeah, he's a bad guy. Yeah, just like I thought he would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the way that played out. Comat's planet kind of reminded me of the Nagri from Legends, and how, at the end of one of the battles, a ship crashed on the planet, made the planet basically toxic for everybody. They can't go there. That was kind of a cool play. And Miramir, she didn't get a lot of perspective. Like everything we really got from her was from Dathan's perspective, but she was smart.
Yeah.
Super smart. She was able to hack ships and everything. But like you said, like when they stole Ochi's ship, like they had a good plan, but they didn't think about the fact that somebody might be tracking Ochi.
Yep.
And because I was like, when we got to their fate at the end, because at the beginning of the book, I was like, I wonder if we're going to see their fate, like, wow, like this could be really sad. And when we got there, boy, that did not leave me unimpressed. I was really choked up on that, because like the whole Jakku scene when they go there, you'd seen that moment in the films where she's, being pulled by Plutt, and you're like, she's screaming at the ship going, so you knew it was going to be emotional. And then they did it to you twice. Like the kid cried twice. I'm like, oh man, this is rough. And, parents that have to leave their kids for the first time are going to relate to that scene. That was a brutal scene, knowing, and they went into Dathan's point of view. He's like, I have to let Miriam do it. I can't do it. I'm a coward. And he's sitting there berating himself. And I'm just like, dude, that is totally like, no, you don't take the kid. And I'm sitting there going, don't leave her, man. Don't leave her. But she'd have been captured. They overlooked that one little thing about the fact that Ochi could be tracked. And that, they would have got away with it had it not been for that.
Yep. And
they found him so quick. And it just all turned on a dime. And there were moments like that. Like even when Luke was fighting, Kiza, and he realized, what was going on with her. Like, when Kiza, quote, died before the Sith took her over. And then again, it was like, man, these things, like, I was like, oh God, are these snakes going to take this out? Is this going to happen real quick? And then it didn't. It happened quick in a different route. And I'm just like, wow, talk about take it all the way up to the end. Because I'm looking at this book thinking it's almost over, and I've got like 400 pages, or 200 pages, 100 pages. And I'm like, how is this going to end? And then we're getting to the end, and I'm like, I've only got like 6 pages left.
Yeah. The whole, with Rey, her parents, and there are just like so many little connections that end up happening. And I think we are due for more books to help tie all this together. And, I hope that they will give it to us, because, this book helped answer a few questions, but I would say we still have 400,000 more, that we would like to see answered. And, this book does a great job of starting that process to make things more cohesive. And yet there's still so much more to kind of like knit together. So
hyperspace tracking is a key prime example of that. We get some basic physics of it. It's around page 324 or so. Lando, they're talking about the hyperspace tracking. He goes, if you have the right data, and if you know exactly what you're looking for, including the ionization rate and the cycle frequency of the ship's hyperdrive motivator. You could theoretically filter the hyperwave data collected by the beacons and match it to the signature of the ship. And then Luke's like, well, yeah, but except for the networks, falling apart. And I'm sitting here thinking, but 10 years later, they're still doing it. So like that. Yep. Were they doing a different way?
Exactly.
So that gap of 10 years, like if it wasn't a 10-year gap, if it was like maybe 6 months, some of those things would have worked, but it wouldn't have worked with Rey's age. So it's kind of like, there's a juggle there as to where are we going to put this, which is probably one of my only nitpicks when it comes to story group in general. It's like a lot of times they don't want to dial in a story, and these kind of things are the results. You're like, but why would they sit on that for 10 years and have that ability and not use it?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, again, it's one of the things I think anytime that you are going to add to a massive story like this, you do have to think about the implications for everything. And that's one of the difficulties, I think, right? I mean, it just really is. It's definitely one of the difficulties of this story. And the sequel trilogy in general, it just creates a lot of questions, and this helps answer some of those, but there's still so many more. And I'm really interested, like where you ended up landing, Mark, for your ratings for the book.
That I'm gonna say it's a solid 7. I mean, it drew me in, and for a long book, it didn't feel as long as it was. Every time it felt long, it was in the opposite of a bad way. Like it felt long and I wanted to get all my answers. Like it was not a bad problem to have. I really enjoyed getting to see Luke and Lando doing their thing. It reminded me of that Legends book where they went in that one ship and did all the really crazy adventures. But that there was some moments there where I was realizing the differences in the relationship of those characters from their Legends counterparts, because there was some things that Lando was still like not quite willing to accept that Luke could do. And I'm like, dude, Lando and Legends would have totally been like, yeah, dude, you do anything, man. So it's kind of cool to see that there are still some limitations to their friendships. That, like Luke's been busy. And I think that is something that we see in their relationship because they're not as close as we thought they would be. The dark side element and the threat of the Sith and stuff from, Kiza and the Viceroy, I thought that worked really well. Palpatine was a little lacking. It was cool to see him show up. I mean, we didn't see him, we heard him basically. I mean, Ochi is the only one that confirmed it was Palpatine. As far as we really know, it could have been anybody else, but Ochi said it's Palpatine and what got excited. So we had to get excited, but it's a handoff there. I mean, it's like the Yoda mystery, it's like how much of the mystery do you want to reveal before you've gone too far? So I feel like Adam did a good job of giving me enough, keeping me questioning. And I have to wonder how much of that was, his actual decision to write those elements into the story, or if it was some of the things like, can you address these things in some form along the way? And this is kind of what we'd like you to kind of lead the reader to believe. Because I do kind of feel like that might have also been at work.
Yeah, I agree with you. No, I'm actually quite similar. I think I would probably, if I was doing out of 10, I'd give that same rating, 7 out of 10. I think this is a really well-written book. I think any faults in it, I think, don't have anything to do with the author. I think they have to do with, and we mentioned it 1,000 times, there's just so many questions. They can't all be answered in one book. And even by answering one question, you kind of raise 5 more. And so you're just in some ways somewhat compounding that issue. But I think this was a fun book. It's a great Star Wars book. It again, just being there with Luke and Lando in the story in this time period was fantastic. And so I'm just really glad that we got it. And I hope that they will continue to go down this road where we stop being afraid to answer questions. And that we actually start to answer some questions and allow things to make more sense. But Mark, if anybody wanted to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, check out your other podcasts and everything, where would people find you?
You can find me on Star Wars Beyond the Films. I'm over there doing things with Jim Lahane. You might know him from Talking Tauntauns. I'm also playing around on TikTok. That's become my new little secret passion, geeky passion, embarrassed passion. I don't know. My son gives me a hard time, and I just have a fun time making fun content on the thing. It's all stupid little Lego Star Wars and Scout stuff, but yeah. Doing it one thing at a time, man. You know how it goes.
Well, you can also find me all over the place, of course, social media-wise, MattRushing02, and then, of course, here on the network, outside the 602 Club, got the Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise, The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Saddle Up about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and then, of course, the Artificial Tango about a Star Trek Picard. Over on the Nerd Party Network, completed show I did with Dre Kaufman as we talk about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time on Owl Post. And then last but not least, Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills. It is a Star Wars podcast, and of course, we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us, and may the Force be with you.
Thank you.